Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Inspiration Collection Network, and thank you for being part of what makes this possible. In this video, you'll learn the three-dimensional value scale and fundamental shading techniques, a simple but essential part of the process. If you're completely new to drawing, these 3 videos are going to be extremely important to get you started. I'm adding the links to these in the description below, so when you have a chance, make sure that you go back and watch these. They walk you through specific exercises for improving a drawing, even for people who have zero experience. The idea is to start simple and eventually build up to more complex form. For today's exercise, we're going to do an alternate form of the value scale. You're going to create 2 long rectangles freehand, so you're not going to use a straight edge, and it will not come out perfect, but your goal is to exercise the muscles in your hands to have stability. So you want to create each of these shapes freehand. Under these 2 rectangles, you're going to create a zigzag line with 6 peaks, and you'll join each corner down to a new zigzag line, exactly the same as the one above it. It's going to end up looking like an accordion pamphlet or like a staircase. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a reflection of the bottom zigzag so that it creates the bottom planes of these rectangular prisms. And we're going to add these same 6 separations to the 2 rectangles on the top of the page. One of the things that I want you to do is I want you to go back to the original sketch of these shapes and add a little more definition, refine the line work, and try to make sure, using freehand, that your rectangle looks pretty even. And then you're going to visually divide that rectangle into 6. And even though this might seem like a small detail of this process, that visual division is going to help train your eyes to use that type of visual math in your drawings. It's actually how we figure out proportion. So for example, if you want to divide this new one into 6, you'd have to first separate it perfectly in half, and then separate both halves into 3. And even though it seems very simple, the first time that you try this, you're probably going to have a hard time keeping each space exactly the same. And you'll notice in my drawing, it certainly doesn't look perfect, nor like I use any sort of straight edge. And that's what you want to try. You want to exercise your hand's ability to capture and refine the shapes that you're looking for, which is a continuous process throughout the exercise. We're going to go through and define each and every line of our initial sketch to solidify the shapes and make the 3-dimensional form of these rectangular prisms sharper. And like I said, even though we're trying to capture a 3-dimensional form here, don't stress too much about getting the shapes perfect. That's something we can worry about later. This clip is from my 10-day Fundamental Secrets Master Course, which teaches the most important methods and techniques that we use in drawing to accurately capture reality. I'll include the link to that in the description below. Without stressing too much, take your time with the line work and try to define each of these rectangular prisms that are side by side. We are going to do a value scale on the first 2 rectangles on top, and we're going to do an abstract form of the value scale using these 3-dimensional prisms at the bottom. Imagining that the light is coming from the right, we're going to add a soft tone on the planes facing away from the light on just the 3 prisms on the left. And this puts into place the shadow area. So on the top one, we're going to separate the light area from the shadow area by making the left 3 spaces the same soft shadow tone. And you're going to do so using only horizontal lines, trying to correct any sizing mistakes along the way. So if you need to move some lines over, make those corrections as you fill these areas in. And you're going to keep these 3 spaces the exact same tone, simply to separate the light on the right side from the shadow area on the left. We're going to add the other variations of tone, but for now we want to keep it very simple. What you're going to do now is in the light area, you'll make these 2 boxes the mid-tone. So they'll be the lightest tone other than white. And this is the start of the shadow. You want the shadow area and the light area, which includes the midtones. And we're going to use the same system on the bottom, filling even the planes facing the light with a soft tone. And notice the direction that I use to fill in each of these shapes. So the 3D value scale at the bottom is going to portray the idea that each of these planes facing the light is getting hit directly, and the closer we get to the right, the lighter they get. And every plane facing away from the light is receiving almost no amount of light and is getting darker the further to the left that we get. And do you notice how as soon as we add this value, we have 6 planes facing the light, 6 planes facing away from the light, and of course the bottom planes of these rectangular prisms. Now, the goal is going to be to create the illusion that the light's coming from the right, and the further you go to the left, the darker it gets. So what we're going to do is we're going to add more intensity to the shape on the left, and we're going to use vertical hatching to fill it in while staying within the shape. And once we create that new layer, then we're going to add another layer with horizontal hatching. So every layer that we add, we're going to try to change the direction that we're hatching in. And then you are going to take the next 2 and you're going to add a new layer of shadow to them, but you're going to make sure that as you do the same process, you keep the one on the left darker than the one on the right, creating that light to dark gradient of the value scale. And again, make sure to change the hatching direction as you add layers. So you do vertical, horizontal, and then eventually you can also do a diagonal all the way through. And as you add new layers, it'll help to smooth out that tone that you are working with. And it's going to look really weird at first, but you're going to keep adding new layers of shadow until the shape on the far left is as dark as it can get, and the shape on the right is the only white that exists. Then you're going to make the second from the right dark enough so it's a subtle jump from the one on the far left. And you're going to keep adding layers until you get a nice gradual change from one block to the next. And the difficult part here is to make sure that each one of these values is unique, that none of them are the same or too close to one another. And each one is going to be clearly separated by a line. In the value scale below it, what we're going to do is we're going to do the same 6 separations, the same values, except what we're going to do is blend them into one another only using line quality and hatching. So you start the same way. You separate the right side and left side into light area and shadow area. Make sure that the space on the right is pure white. The next 2 are going to be part of the mid-tone, so they're going to have a very soft tone added to them. And now we can move on to the darkest tone on both the prisms and the value scale in the middle. So again, the one on the left side, you want to make it the absolute darkest tone. And the bigger the shape is and the darker you go, the scarier it is, because it feels like if you go out of the shape even a little bit, since it's so dark, it'll be very hard to fix. So when you're doing this one of the challenges is going to be that you're going to have to stay within the boundaries while maintaining a smooth surface. And I do this by alternating the direction that I'm hatching in and adding multiple layers until the surface becomes smooth. Now, when I add the second value, instead of keeping them clearly separate, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a soft transition between the darkest value and this new value. And you're going to try to maintain the same value as the shape above. Continue to alternate the hatching direction and continue on to the third value. Continuing to add the new layers and then going back through and adding a soft transition between that one and the previous value. And you're only doing this with line quality. You're not using a stump or a brush to blend. You're simply changing the pressure on the pencil to create a soft transition from one value to the next. And then of course you continue to layer in these values until it becomes very smooth, making sure that there's no big jump from any tone to the next, and going back in and relayering until the surface becomes smoother. You'll always have the pencil texture on the paper, but you'll notice that the more you layer and the more uniform your line work is, the smoother the surface is going to feel. And the messier your line work is, the more you'll end up relying on smudging to blend colors together. You want to get really good at really controlling the pressure that you use to create those lines to make sure that the effect is successful. And if you're not really sure how to do blending or transitions, this is your chance to experiment with it. If you feel like your first attempt doesn't go too well, try it as many times as you need to. You can never do too many value scales. Now for the one at the bottom, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the planes facing away from the light, gradually getting lighter as we move more towards the right, and making sure to maintain a combination of both diagonal and vertical hatching as you fill in each of these shapes. The difficult part about this one is that since there are spaces between each of these tones, it's going to be a lot harder to see if you manage to get each one to get darker than the last. The goal here is to make sure that the value scale is still correct regardless of the form. And now we're going to do the same process, but on the planes facing the light, making them get darker and darker as they move towards the left. And again, the challenge here is to make sure that when you're looking at all the planes facing the light, you keep each one its own value, making sure that it gets progressively darker as it gets closer to the darkest shadow tone. And then for the bottom planes, you can add a shadow tone to all of them. They're facing away from the light so they can be pretty dark, and keep that same pattern going. As they get closer to the light, they get moderately lighter. And once you get to the point where every part of this prism combination is filled in, now it's up to you to exercise your ability to push the values. So this is where the big question comes up of, when is an artwork finished? Well, you could always just end it here, or you could continue to push that idea that the further away that you get to the left, the darker it gets. So I'm going to go to the darkest areas and I'm going to make them even darker. And I'm going to make sure that every single value is in its own value range. This is a really good exercise to train your eyes to recognize value distinctions. As you get better and better at this, you'll know exactly which areas you need to add more light to or more shadow to. The reason why this works really well is because you have 3 separate directions that the planes are facing. One is facing towards the light, the others are facing away from the light towards the left, and then you have the bottom plane. So you have to treat each one individually, and also the entire figure as a whole. And like I said before, this is a really difficult exercise, so if you don't get it right the first time, try it as many times as necessary. And this works for any 3-dimensional prism. This value scale is what we use to make sure that our form is explained correctly. We've got the light area facing the light, the shadow, and the cast shadow. And we use these tones to make sure that we are able to create a believable illusion of depth and space. Now, as you're doing all this, you might question whether it's right or wrong to use your finger to smudge. The right answer, I would say, is that it's not the best practice, because when you use your finger, you place your own body's oils on the paper and they affect the archival quality of whatever it is you're drawing. You'll find that I'll use my finger for a lot of my drawing process, but when I do certain commissions or certain projects, I avoid doing it to make sure that the archival process of the piece is not affected. You'll find different blending and smudging methods that work for you, but what I would suggest is when you're starting off, try to make sure that you attempt to do the blending purely with line quality and pressure control. If you haven't already, you can access my 10-day Fundamental Drawing Secrets Master Course in the description below. In this course, I teach the most important methods and techniques used in academic drawing to accurately capture reality, to help artists of every level go from drawing simple shapes and forms to more complex and intricate figures. And know that every single talented artist started with simple lines and simple shapes. We all start in the same exact place, and how good we get is directly determined by how much time we spend doing it. So make sure that you keep moving forward with it. Make sure that you're subscribed so you keep up with the latest videos that I release. Feel free to ask any art-related questions in the comments. Make sure to leave a like, and I will see you in the next video.